Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based in West Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictions. Welcome to our podcast, which I call It's Not About the Sex, also the title of my recent book. Here we focus on all topics related to compulsive sexual behavior, often referred to as sex addiction. In particular, we explore ways to build long-term, sustainable recovery while establishing more meaningful connection and greater intimacy. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints, brand new perspectives, and practical user-friendly tools toward living a more deeply connected life. Let's get started. Happy New Year, Sue.
Happy New Year, Andrew.
You know, this year I questioned myself when I used the words Happy New Year. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
It just rang a little false.
Yeah.
And so when I was writing to people, I would write, have a safe and healthy New Year.
Oh, yeah, I got that a few times.
I mean, it makes sense considering what we're going through. But I also sometimes would write, have a safe, healthy, and resilient New Year. And I'm not sure where that came from exactly, but I wanted to come up with something different than something kind of rote or something that didn't carry a whole lot of meaning, especially in the midst of so many challenges that we're all facing.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, I decided resiliency, or what I sometimes just call resilience, seemed to resonate for me. And I don't know about you, and tell me what you think about this, but the word resilient really rolls off my tongue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use it very often. I like to. I think when I hear the word resilience, I think it comes packed with a lot of information. Like it's not just a word. To me, it's not just like springing back, as like in the definition it says.
Mm-hmm.
There's more to the recovering that has a lot. It's deeper than just a springboard, I think, when I hear it.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I agree. It's not a lightweight word at all. But since we are talking about recovery in general with this podcast, I thought that we could talk about resilience in terms of how it fits in with folks in recovery from various kinds of addictive compulsive behaviors, but also what it really means in terms of our nervous system and how we respond to life's challenges. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So I went to the dictionary, Merriam-Webster dictionary. Actually, it was online, but it was a dictionary nonetheless. And the definition they came up with for resilience was the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. What do you think about that?
Well, I would think that the capacity is the key word there, right? You have to own that. Like you have to be able to understand and hold open that space of having capacity. So you can't just be resilient. Well, I don't know. It's hard. I think as I dive down deeper into this, because I haven't really thought about it, it's important to understand, or is it? Is it important to understand what resiliency is in order to be resilient, or are some people just naturally resilient?
Well, that's the big question, right? I think is it the chicken or the egg in that way? And I've been giving some thought to this before our talk today. And what I realize is that resilience is something that actually grows when something bad happens to us. That if we are just going through life without many challenges or obstacles, resilience actually doesn't build. And so what we're really talking about is how we as human beings build larger capacity for life's issues, kind of like in 12-step living life on life's terms. And so the difficulties, the obstacles, the challenges, the traumas that happen to each of us are really where is the opportunity to build the capacity for more resilience.
But I can see that sometimes it's not, it can be done in unhealthy ways.
Say more.
So people can sometimes just bury things away and it appears that they're being resilient and they're being tough, but are they really dealing with what the issues are, or are they just kind of burying them away like a coping mechanism, right? So I guess in whose eye is it to judge like whether you're recovering, and how is that recovering actually something that's healthy?
I think that's a fantastic distinction you're making because, in my way of looking at it, resilience is something positive. It's something that happens within us in order to, and not to sound too trite, but to make lemonade out of lemons, right? It's not about burying things. It's not about being in denial about things. It's about taking on whatever life throws at us, and to then become more able to deal with it and to bounce back from it more efficiently. So let me share a little bit about how I envision that, because I think this is where the nervous system resiliency really comes in. So if we can live more of the time in a resilient, regulated, and resourceful way, that's a real place of buoyancy. It's a real place of living the fullness of life, and really experiencing life's feelings and thoughts and experiences, everything to its max. Okay. But inevitably, as we know, something happens, something bad happens to us, and it's dysregulating, right? It moves us into a place sometimes of upregulation, like panic or rage or anything that is where it feels like the motor inside of us is revving too high. Or we downregulate, which is another kind of dysregulation, and the motor is running too low, and we feel disconnected or depressed or dissociative or just shut down, right? So in terms of resiliency, what we're talking about is when we dysregulate, which we all do at one time or another, how do we find our way back to a more resilient state more efficiently, right? And so I really look at resilience as a very positive, full, and regulated way of being in the world. So that's what I consider nervous system resiliency.
And it's a state that you mentioned,
Correct.
state of being.
Right.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the ideal way of going through life is that when something happens to us that's too much to process at the time, that we're able to come back to it more quickly. We're able to face it, usually with the help of others, because connection is one way that we feel more regulated, right? And so in essence, what we're talking about today, this idea of resilience, is that it's kind of like a touchstone. It's like, oh, I feel more like myself when I'm resilient, right? I
So it
feel
brings you back to a place of where you're, like you say, you feel more like yourself. More in balance, I guess is the word I'm saying. Looking for.
right,
Yeah.
right. And to bring it all the way back to addictive compulsive behaviors, we're more vulnerable to addictive compulsive type behaviors when we're dysregulated, right? So if we're more resilient, if we're feeling more like ourselves, chances are we're not as likely to slip or relapse. But on the other side, if we stay dysregulated for too long, if our resilience is not something that we can come back to more efficiently, then there's really some vulnerability there.
Yeah, a lot of things are just firing in my brain right now. So how would you apply this to shame?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought this through entirely, but Brene Brown, who I talk about quite a bit, writes quite a bit about shame resiliency. And her idea is that we all live with shame in one form or another. It's simply another emotional state that is inevitable. But just like with anything, if we can, like you said before, if we bury it, if we're in denial about it, if we push it down, it just kind of festers, right? But if we bring it out into the light of day, if we talk about it, if we share our story about our shame, if we're able to normalize it and be around others who are able to really be loving and validating of our feelings, and also remind us of how it's just a temporary state, because shame doesn't have to be chronic, hopefully, although there is a lot of chronic shame out there, unfortunately. But I one of the things that Brene Brown talks about is that shame is given to us by others, and and shame is healed through others. I'll say that once more. Shame is given to us by others, and shame is healed through others. So again, she's talking about connection. She's talking about vulnerability. She's reminding us that if we're able to bring it into the light and bring some oxygen to these feelings that might be uncomfortable or awkward or of course shameful, then we're on the right track to feeling more resilient. And so that's where it comes together, that if we're able to face it rather than hide from it, there's resilience that goes along with that, and our nervous system responds to it in kind.
So, do you have any takeaways? Just like how, like journaling or like being mindful. I know we talked about those things in the past, but are those things helpful in building your resilience? Or are there any other ways that you can work on building your own resilience?
Right. It's interesting. I'm just formulating what I would call some resilience skills. And so I'm going to just off the top of my head share some ideas, and you already mentioned a few. One of them, of course, is writing about it, right? We forget that the power of journaling is truly healing. And it's one way of processing. What I always say is if we keep things in, if we keep things tucked away, that's when it festers, right? But if we're able to write about it, if we're able to read about it, if we're able to pray and meditate about it, it's really all of the different tools and ideas and skills from 12 step are connected to what we're talking about. So talk to a sponsor about it, talk to a therapist about it, talk to a friend about it, talk to a pastor about it, anybody who you trust, any emotionally reliable folks who you feel you can be open and honest with and vulnerable with in terms of where the shame exists within you. Because just that alone, just by sharing it, it's going to build a foundation of resilience. So again, if it's in journaling, if it's in maybe writing poetry even, or if it's in sharing with people that you find really, really dependable and that you enjoy talking to about what's really going on inside, which is a courageous thing, of course. Not many people do that, but this is really about letting others get closer to you and be with you, warts and all. So that's just a few things. I think there's wonderful books. I mean, I love The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. There's an older book called Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw, which is certainly a classic. And so that's just a few things that our listeners might consider.
I jotted them down. Thanks.
Awesome.
Well, it's funny because I think sometimes I'm more resilient with some things, and I've gotten better with that. But there's still so much room to improve that. Do you have examples of your own resilience?
Well, I was just going to respond to what you shared because I know you weren't joking about writing down some of these things for yourself, because we've known each other a long time, right? Is it 35 years this year? 36
yeah, maybe
years?
36.
It's hard to believe, but we've been basically siblings for a long, long time. And as part of that, you and I have an open channel to share with each other what's really going on. And we share things that we don't share with everyone. And I'm so grateful for that, number one. And I just want to say that out loud, that I want to savor that gratitude in our relationship in that way. But I don't want to minimize the power of having a true blue friend, a person in your life that you can be totally yourself with. So one of the things that you and I do share is that we came from complicated childhoods, and they weren't awful. They weren't completely disruptive to who we are as human beings. We've persevered and we've built resilience as a result of our childhoods. But I just want to share with our listeners that that's that's the gift, and it's a little bit of an upside down gift, but that's the gift of coming from a challenging childhood, right? Because, I grew up, for instance, with three older brothers that I was not close to. So in a way, I felt like an only child. And it's not that I didn't acknowledge them. I grew up with them, but we lived very separate lives. And in my home, all six of us lived kind of very separate emotional lives in a lot of ways. And I mentioned this as an example of how it required me to find other sources of love, basically. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Part of my resilience is the fact that I had a grandmother who was incredibly loving toward me. The unconditional love was through the roof. And also, with that, and I don't mean to compare human beings and animals, but I will anyway, my dog, Nikki, my Siberian Husky, brown and white with two different color eyes, was amazing. And he was consistent and he was there through thick and thin. And I always say, if it wasn't for my grandmother and my dog, I don't know if I'd have the resilience that I do today. So I was really fortunate that I had sources of love and sources of consistency that really made things possible for me to persevere and to find ways of transcending what was going on at home. The other thing I just want to add to that briefly is that I've always been a heat-seeking missile. And part of what I learned early was if I wasn't going to find it at home, I was going to find it elsewhere. So I was adopted by several families as I grew up, and I'm so incredibly appreciative to each and every one of them because I think they sensed that there was not a whole lot of opportunity for me to feel at peace within my own home. And so they really did take me under their wing, and I always had a best friend growing up, and I just gravitated towards people who seemed to have something going on that my family didn't. And again, I was just so grateful for that. And that's where my resilience grew. What about you?
I was dreading that you were going to ask me that. I don't know, honestly, how I became so resilient. I think I just built up walls and kind of escaped into my own little fantasy in my head to get what I thought I needed as a young child. And I still have difficulties with relationships, and I think that goes back to the shame and but I do brush things off pretty quickly and dismiss things almost too quickly. So I don't know if that's a really good thing that I do. I do sometimes come back and visit things that I feel like I didn't the first time let it really bother me per se. And but yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that too, like in the vein of resilience and just recovering quickly from something that other people might be feeling victimized about, and then there's other people that you can see visually that they're not getting upset about this, but other people are getting upset about this. And have they just dealt with it more quickly, or like you? It's just, to me, I don't understand like how the same thing can happen to somebody in the same vein, in the same family, maybe, and then people just deal with it differently, I guess.
It's a really complex question,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it really starts with nature versus nurture in some ways. But the way I see it is some of us are born into the world with a particular kind of sensitivity and a particular kind of spirit and desire to grow. And sometimes that expands and sometimes that contracts. But my hunch, and I don't know if there's any research to back this up, but my hunch is that it's really about how our DNA comes into the world, right? Our that original blueprint. And then what experiences are able to really make that even more expansive. So, for instance, I'm just going to share about something that I witnessed with you in college. So, when I saw things not go your way in college, I saw you go into action. I mean, you would get upset just like anyone would, but you would go into action and you would do something about it. Sometimes it was impulsive, sometimes it was thought out, but either way, I saw you move. You didn't sit in it for very long. And I've always admired that in you because for some reason, and again, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint, but for some reason, there's that resilient kind of experience of life that told you that you didn't want to be a victim, basically. You didn't want to sit in it and just play dead. And I think there's something really powerful in terms of how do we move? Because sometimes as a kid, we are victimized, especially, I mean, adults, not so much, but kids are victimized because they don't have choice. They're often stuck in their circumstances. And when a person is resilient, they're able to empower themselves to look at their options and to stay mobile. And staying mobile or creating some mobility is really the nervous system saying, okay, let's go. Let's find our way back to ourselves again. And I think that's where I think you have demonstrated that it's really possible to try things out. And I think you've experimented and tried different things, and some things worked and some things didn't work,
yeah,
like for most of us.
yeah.
But it's been really, I've always admired that in you because it's your nervous system really being resilient and being able to stay on track and to try and stay true to yourself ultimately.
Nice. No, I do see that action. I do always take action, so I guess I didn't realize that that was part of being resilient. But yeah, I'm definitely a mover and a shaker and get things done. Troubleshoot. I love to figure it out.
Exactly.
Do you want to close with an example of resilience of a client?
Of course. I was thinking about this as we were approaching today's podcast, and I was thinking about someone in particular, and this is not his real name, but I'll call him Brian. And Brian was someone who was referred to my practice after a rehab experience. He was dealing with alcoholism and depression, and he was referred by this dual diagnosis program. And what's always really, I guess this is where I try and maintain a beginner's mind when it comes to clients who are referred in my direction. I really saw that he was in a position in his life where he truly wanted something that was different and something that was more satisfying. And unfortunately, prior to that, he just felt a little bit lost. He felt like he super lonely, profoundly lonely actually, and suicidal as part of that. And once he went through his treatment experience, what came to be was he started to experience a sense of purpose. And in his case, he realized that he wanted to actually work in the addiction and dual diagnosis industry. And so it's been a process and a slow process to get there. But what I noticed in terms of his resilience is that he has some family members that have been very positive in his life. He hasn't, up to now, he hadn't cultivated those relationships, but nowadays he is building these relationships much more in a way that's just feeling much better to him, and that's much more real and much more intimate. And again, the connection, the feeling of connection that he's starting to experience, both with family, with 12 step, and he's very involved, by the way, in 12 step and in terms of his sponsor and people that he's now actually giving advice and listening to. He's very active in his 12 step groups. And so it's really exciting to see that he's finding this sense of purpose. And I think resilience is actually a spiritual kind of experience. It's not just about the nervous system. It's not just about shame, for instance. It's also about the soul and the spirit and feeling resilient as a human being in the world. And that was the arc for this particular person, where I think he was feeling so disconnected. And nowadays he's feeling more connected, and he's feeling more hope and a sense of, oh, okay, I feel more like myself more of the time. And that's subjective, of course, but it's very much a reminder of, I didn't used to feel like this. I didn't feel more like myself more of the time. I felt more like an outsider. I felt more like an observer. And now he really feels like a participant. So on a visceral level, and certainly when I'm talking with him, his voice is different. His voice is stronger. His eye contact is better. And his whole demeanor and outlook on life just has a resilience of, oh, okay, I've been through all of this. I've had a rough time. Now what? And that's so exciting for me to witness and to be in a
Wow,
part of what he goes through. And I get to meet with him on a weekly basis. And
amazing.
and yeah, he's really on his way to a completely different life.
That's amazing. So that's a great testament to doing the work and finding the purpose. And actually self-awareness is huge in all of that, because knowing what feels good is important, and for him to uncover that, I'm sure was uh, a great part of his journey.
That's very, very important. I mean, it sounds really simple in some ways, but self awareness, if we think about it in terms of the nervous system and of our internal world, if we don't know what we're feeling or thinking, if we don't know what sensations are going on in our body, if we're not able to tap into our memories or the images of our life that make up who we are, it's really not a cohesive story. But the self awareness that grows, where someone can say, oh, yeah, I am feeling cranky today. How do I respond to that crankiness? What's my relationship to my crankiness? And how can I come back to a more resilient state more easily?
So keep asking yourself those questions, right? And I think now maybe people have more self-awareness through all this self-quarantining period of time we've been through. Hopefully, people have grown spiritually and connected more with how they feel. So that's the only, I think, thing through all of this that has been saving me.
Same here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned the pandemic because this is a time of resilience, right?
Hmm.
Between
For sure.
our
Yeah.
political turmoil, um, COVID, um, just everything that's been happening this past year, it's an opportunity. I mean, it's not to sound trite again, but it's an opportunity to build resilience, right? And unfortunately, some folks are very vulnerable to falling off the wagon and going back into some really unhealthy and dangerous patterns. And yet others are resourcefully and resiliently finding ways of really being more aware of what it is inside of them that can help them persevere at a time like this and even transcend the kind of heaviness that's going on around us and inside of us.
Nice.
So I don't have anything else to share or ask, Sue, but I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts you wanted to add before we wind down.
I guess just to echo what you said, that self-awareness and during this time especially, things can get really difficult. And I don't want people to use that as an excuse moving forward, but just to keep asking yourself those questions as you showed us the example with your client and how his journey has really helped him to feel connected and find those people that will help you and don't discount yourself either, you know?
For sure. And just to piggyback on that, it is a time of reevaluating and reassessing what really counts. So, whatever makes your life and recovery worth living, I really encourage all of you to ask yourself those big ticket item questions and to also find what those things are that give you a reason to wake up in the morning. And resilience is a skill-based kind of experience. It's not something that just happens to us. It's something that we get to practice on a daily basis. So whatever that means to you and however you bring those ideas together, I encourage you to consider what's available to you. Thank you for listening today. It was so great sharing the time with my colleague and friend, Sue Merlino, and discussing this really vital topic that affects those affected by out-of-control sexual behavior. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, or please share our podcast on Spotify. And if there are any topics you would like us to discuss in the future, just let us know. I look forward to you joining us on future podcasts, and thanks again for being with us today.